What does a judge do when the whole courtroom laughs at the only witness an old woman has left? Judith Sheindlin had heard lies in every shape. She had heard polished lies, trembling lies, angry lies, and lies so practiced they came out with a smile. By the early years of her television courtroom, she could often feel the falsehood before the sentence ended. It lived in the eyes. It lived in the shoulders. It lived in the strange little pauses people used when they were trying to remember what they had already claimed. But on that afternoon, the pause did not come from a person. It came from a small green parrot in a wire cage sitting on the plaintiff's table between an 81-year-old widow and a stack of papers she could barely keep still in her hands. Eleanor Whitcomb had soft, white curls, watery eyes, and a pale blue cardigan buttoned too carefully, the way older women dress when they are trying not to fall apart in public. Her neighbor, Margaret Price, sat across from her in a beige skirt suit, rigid as a church pew, her pearl necklace pressed against her throat. Judith looked down from the bench and narrowed her eyes. She said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, are you telling me your witness is a bird?" The room chuckled. Even the young producer near the wall lowered his face, trying not to smile. Bailiff Bird kept his expression steady, but his eyes moved once toward the cage. Eleanor's fingers tightened around the handle. "Your Honor, Charlie knows what happened." Judith leaned back. She had no patience for theatrics. She had less patience for people who mistook grief for evidence. Inside, a single sentence formed before she spoke it. "Do not turn this courtroom into a circus." But she did not say it yet. Something about Eleanor's face stopped her. It was not the face of a woman trying to be clever. It was the face of a woman who had already lost too much to care if strangers thought she was ridiculous. Margaret gave a brittle laugh. "Judy, I have lived next door to her for 32 years. I did not steal anything from that woman." Judith's eyes cut to her. "First of all, you don't call me Judy. Second of all, 32 years is plenty of time to learn where a person keeps things." The laughter died a little. The claim was simple. Eleanor said a ring had disappeared from her bedroom drawer 3 weeks after her husband Harold's memorial. Not a large diamond, not an expensive showpiece. A modest gold ring with a tiny blue stone, the color of a robin's egg, bought by a machinist who had saved small amounts of cash in an envelope for more than a year. Eleanor said Harold had meant to give it to her on their 40th anniversary, but he died before the date arrived. Margaret said there had never been any ring. She said Eleanor had become forgetful since Harold's death. She said she had helped clean the house, yes, and carried boxes to the garage, yes, and sorted old tools, yes, but she had never touched jewelry. Then the bird stirred. Charlie tilted his head, lifted one gray claw, and spoke in a small, cracked voice that sounded almost like an old man whispering from another room. "Don't tell Margaret. Hide it in the garage." This time the room did not merely chuckle, it laughed. The sound rolled through the courtroom with the quick cruelty people sometimes have when age, animals, and sorrow appear together. Eleanor closed her eyes. Margaret looked down. Judith did not laugh. She looked at the cage, then she looked at Margaret. Then she looked back at Eleanor. The bird had repeated a sentence. The widow had heard a goodbye. Judith had spent years in Manhattan family court learning that the most important fact in a room was rarely the loudest one. A child might say nothing and still tell you everything. A mother might scream because she was lying, or because truth had finally cornered her. A father might come in with clean shoes and folded hands, and leave a room colder than when he entered. Court had taught Judith to listen for what did not match. And Margaret Price did not match. She was too still. Her face had gone pale in a way that anger did not explain. She kept touching the pearls at her throat, not as a gesture of elegance, but like a woman trying to keep herself from saying a name. Judith said, "Mrs. Price, look at me." Margaret raised her eyes. "Did you ever see that ring?" "No." "Did you ever see a box that might have held it?" "No." "Did you ever move anything from Mrs. Whitcomb's bedroom into your garage?" Margaret hesitated. It was less than a second, but Judith caught it like a dropped plate. Margaret said, "I moved old things, Harold's things. She asked me to help." Eleanor whispered, "I never asked you to take his cigar box." Judith turned. "What cigar box?" Eleanor swallowed. Her voice became smaller. "Harold kept screws in it. Receipts, little notes. He used to put anything important in that old box because he said nobody would steal from something that smelled like machine oil." The parrot shifted again and tapped the metal bars with its beak. "Don't tell Margaret! Hide it in the garage!" No one laughed now. And this is the part of the story most people in that courtroom did not understand at first. Judith was no longer listening to the parrot as proof. She was listening to Eleanor as a widow. She knew the difference. Evidence could decide a case, but grief decided how a person carried the case into the room. Judith said, "Mrs. Whitcomb, when did Charlie first start saying that sentence?" Eleanor looked at the cage, then at her hands. "After Harold got sick. He would sit at the kitchen table and talk to that bird when he thought I was resting. Harold always talked to animals like they were people. He talked to the toaster if it burned the bread." A few older women in the audience smiled softly. Judith did not, but her expression changed. Not warm, exactly, more careful. "What else did he say to Charlie?" Eleanor's mouth trembled. "He said, 'She thinks I forgot.' He said, 40 years deserves something blue.' I heard that once from the hallway. I thought he was talking nonsense from the medicine." Margaret's lips parted. Judith saw it. The whole case turned on that little movement. Judith leaned forward. "Mrs. Price, I'm going to ask you one more time. Did you find a cigar box?" Margaret's voice broke before the answer came. "Yes." Eleanor turned toward her as if someone had touched her shoulder from behind. Judith said nothing for a moment. She understood silence as well as speech. In her father Murray's old Brooklyn kitchen, silence had meant think before you talk. In family court, silence had meant fear. In marriage, sometimes silence had meant a person was carrying a thing too heavy to name. She thought, but did not say, that old women often came to court not because they wanted money, but because they wanted someone official to tell the world they had not imagined their own pain. Margaret covered her mouth. "I found it in my garage, behind the Christmas boxes. Harold put it there months before he passed. He used to fix my back steps. He must have left it there. I meant to bring it back." Judith's jaw tightened. "But you didn't." "No." "Why?" The answer came out in pieces. Margaret said she had been angry, not about the ring at first, about Eleanor withdrawing after the funeral, about the curtains staying closed, about the casseroles going untouched, about 30 years of friendship being reduced to a locked front door and a voice through the chain. Eleanor stared at her. "You were angry because my husband died?" Margaret shook her head hard.
I was angry because you disappeared and left me next door with every memory of him too. He fixed my porch.
He brought soup when my George was in the hospital. He called me bossy, and then did whatever I asked. When I found that box, I thought if I returned it, you would open the door for the ring and close it again on me. The room went very quiet. Judith had seen theft. She had seen excuses. She had seen shame come dressed as principle. But this was stranger and sadder. Margaret had not taken the ring because she wanted the little blue stone. She had kept it because it was the last piece of a household that had once included her. The law had a clean place to put that. Conversion, wrongful possession, return the property, maybe damages. But the heart had no clean place for it at all. Bailiff Bird shifted near the wall. Even he looked down. Judith said, "Mrs. Price, you stole from a widow." Margaret nodded, tears starting. "Yes." "And Mrs. Whitcomb, you shut out a friend who did something wrong after losing someone she loved, too." Eleanor stiffened. "She had no right." "No, she did not." Judith's voice softened only by a fraction. "Rights are not the same thing as wounds." That sentence sat in the air. Inside, Judith felt an old ache she did not plan to show. She thought of all the homes she had seen broken open in family court. Apartments where one lamp remained after everyone left. Children carrying toys and garbage bags. Mothers asking if the judge could make somebody love them properly. The country would later know Judith Sheindlin for the glare, for the quick line, for the way she could slice foolishness down to the bone. But what America never saw was the work underneath that sharpness. She was not hard because she felt nothing. She was hard because she had learned what happened when a room let sentiment replace truth. She looked at Eleanor. "Where is the ring now?" Margaret whispered. "In the garage. In the coffee can on the second shelf. Wrapped in a handkerchief." Eleanor made a sound that was not quite a cry. It was smaller than that. Older. The sound of a person realizing that something lost had been waiting all along, and that the waiting had cost her years. Judith picked up her pen. "Judgment for the plaintiff. The ring is to be returned immediately. Court costs awarded. And Mrs. Price, if that ring is not back in Mrs. Whitcomb's hand by tonight, you will wish the bird was the only one talking." A nervous ripple moved through the room. Eleanor looked down at Charlie. The parrot blinked, unimpressed by justice, grief, television, and every human ceremony taking place around him. Then Charlie said it again, softer this time. "Don't tell Margaret. Hide it in the garage." Judith did not smile. She only looked at the two women and understood that Harold Whitcomb had somehow returned to court in the smallest voice in the room. After the taping ended, the case did not leave the studio the way most cases did. Usually, the courtroom emptied quickly. People collected purses, papers, and pride. Producers moved on. The next dispute waited. A television court had the rhythm of a train station. Hurt arrived, hurt was sorted, hurt was sent out the door. But Eleanor stayed seated for a moment with the cage in her lap. Margaret stood beside the aisle, unable to step forward or away. Judith had already risen from the bench, but she paused before leaving. There were moments when the robe made distance necessary, and there were moments when distance became another kind of cruelty. Judith said, "Mrs. Whitcomb." Eleanor looked up. "When you get the ring, do not put it in a drawer." Eleanor's eyes filled again. Where should I put it?" Judith's voice was low.
"On your hand, if that is where he meant it to be."
Margaret began to cry openly then. Not loudly, not theatrically, just with the tired defeat of someone who had finally run out of hiding places. Eleanor did not forgive her in that room. Real forgiveness rarely arrives on cue. It is not obedient. It does not stand when the judge enters. But Eleanor did something almost harder. She turned toward Margaret and said one sentence. "Bring it yourself." Margaret nodded. "I will." That evening, in the small dressing room after the last case, Judith sat with her robe open at the neck and one pearl earring resting in her palm. Judith Sheindlin had come by the studio, silver-haired, kind-eyed, carrying the quiet humor of a man who knew better than to interrupt her too soon. He watched her for a few seconds. He said, "You brought the bird home with you, didn't you?" Judith looked up. "Do not start." "I'm not starting." "You are absolutely starting." Jerry smiled, then grew gentle. What was it really about? She could have said evidence. She could have said property. She could have said 2 stubborn old women and a ring in a coffee can. Instead, she rubbed the pearl between her thumb and forefinger and thought of Eleanor's face when Margaret said yes. She thought of Harold at a kitchen table, sick and failing, joking with a parrot because he still wanted to surprise his wife. She thought of all the people who came before her asking for cash when what they wanted was recognition. Tell them I mattered. Tell them I was loved. Tell them I did not imagine the promise. Judith said, "It was about a woman needing proof that her life had happened." Jerry did not answer right away. That was one of the reasons she trusted him. He knew when a courtroom had followed her home. After a while, he said, "And did she get it?" Judith looked toward the mirror. The lights around it made her face look sharper than she felt. America saw the lace collar, the gavel, the stare that could make grown men stammer. It did not see the woman sitting alone after a strange little case, asking herself why a parrot's sentence had almost made her throat close. Inside, the thought returned. The bird had repeated a sentence. The widow had heard a goodbye. "She will," Judith said, "if Margaret has any sense left in her." Years later, people would remember Judge Judy for the cases that made them laugh, the unpaid loans, the broken couches, the careless boyfriends, the neighbors who could not measure a fence without starting a war. They would remember the quickness, the authority, the way she seemed immune to foolishness. But the people closest to her knew a different truth. The robe came off at the end of every day. The cases never did. The Parrot case was never about whether animals could testify. It was about the absurd ways truth survives when people are too frightened or proud to say it themselves. It survives in a kitchen habit, in a cigar box, in a forgotten garage. In a sentence repeated so many times it stops sounding ridiculous and starts sounding like a message. Judith Sheindlin did not become unforgettable because she was never moved. She became unforgettable because she could be moved and still make the ruling. She could see the foolishness and the wound underneath it. She could tell an old friend she had stolen, and an old widow that shutting the door had also left someone bleeding outside. In the end, the ring returned to Eleanor's hand. Margaret carried it over herself before sundown, wrapped in Harold's handkerchief, with Charlie shrieking from the front room as if announcing a verdict no court could improve. Eleanor did not invite Margaret in that first night, but she did not close the door immediately either. And sometimes,
For women of a certain age, that is where grace begins. Not with a grand embrace, not with music, not with the past repaired, just a door left open a few inches longer than it had been the day before.
If you want more untold chapters from the life and legacy of Judge Judy, subscribe to Beyond the Gavel and stay with the stories behind the robe.